The typical scenario in which HTTP is used is in the communication between a web browser and a web server. Let's see how we can get a direct look at HTTP using the developer tools of Google Chrome.
I'd like to show you how to use Chrome to take a look at HTTP requests and responses. Now, typically, you'll use a browser to simply interact with a website, clicking on its links, filling out its forms, watching its crazy cat videos. As a developer, though, we can use a whole suite of features offered by the Chrome developer tools to take a look under the hood of the browser. Also, know that other modern browsers offer similar functionality, though it may look and work a bit differently than what I'm showing here. So, in Chrome, to view the developer tools, on a Mac you can use Command-Option-I or you can use F12 on Windows. This should bring up a lower panel where you can examine the browser hard at work. Let's navigate to a site to take a look at what's happening. Oh, I have an idea. Let's go to httpbin.org. When you get there, scroll down a bit till you see the link for /HTML and go ahead and click on that link. What comes up is simply a heading element followed by a long paragraph. Down in the developer tools here, let's check out a couple of these tabs to see what your options are. First, if you click on console, you'll see JavaScript errors in here, debugging messages, as well as a live JavaScript console into which you can type whatever JavaScript commands you like. This can be extremely valuable as a front-end developer trying to debug your JavaScript. Let me dismiss this, and if I click on Elements, I'll see the entire HTML structure of the site, or DOM tree as it's called, stands for Document Object Model. You can click on Elements to see the CSS that's attached to each of the elements, and even event listeners of JavaScript that are attached to the elements themselves. This site doesn't have any JavaScript, so there are no event listeners. You can even manipulate the HTML and CSS to preview changes before making them permanent in your application code on the server. This is a nice tool for testing changes that you're about to make. Then, upon refreshing, the page will be reloaded and your changes will be lost. Though there are some other tabs here that I encourage you to explore on your own, let's head to the one we're going to focus on, the Network tab. I'm going to pull this up to give myself a little more room, and I'm going to make sure each one of these icons is gray instead of blue. So if yours are blue, go ahead and click them till they turn gray. What you'll see here is a list of all the requests that have been made as a result of this request to /HTML. Now, my list consists of a whole one item here, and clicking on that item will reveal the details of the HTTP request and response. In this panel over here, the General section shows you the full URL that was used to make the request method that was used in the HTTP request, as well as a response code with a nice little color indicator, in this case saying that that was successfully processed on the server. In addition, I see the remote IP address. Remember, this is the Internet Protocol address of the server that httpbin.org exists on. Now, I'm going to keep these first two sections here collapsed, and let's focus now on this third section of the request headers. When you expand request headers, you have an option to view the source. Currently, what you're seeing is a formatted version of the request headers, but if you click View Source, you'll see an unformatted or raw version of the request headers that were sent in this HTTP request. These should look familiar to you. These are the same headers that we saw in the HTTP request that we were making from Telnet, whether you were doing it in a workspace on Treehouse or you were doing it from your own terminal on your local machine. So taking a look at the details of this request, we can see some of the stuff that we've already become familiar with. The request method here is GET. We're requesting the resource located at the URI /HTML using protocol HTTP version 1.1. Remember, we again list the host in the HTTP request itself of httpbin.org. Now, there are a bunch more headers here that we're not going to talk about specifically, but let me point out one new one here. And that new one is the user agent. You see this long sequence of characters that amounts to what's called the user agent string. This is an identifier for the client that's making this request. Now, you might think we're not in Mozilla, we are not in Safari, we are in Google Chrome though, so you'll see the version of Chrome, and there it is, Chrome right there, version 48.0 dot blah, 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 blah. That is the user agent that tells the web server the exact version of the client that's making the request. Let's now jump to the response headers section. So I'll collapse request headers and expand response headers. If you click on View Source here, you'll see a similar layout of information even if the info itself is different. The first line shows the status of the response, which in this case was status 200, which translates to the message OK. Here we have a server header that indicates the type of server that processed our request and sent the response. And in this case, that was Nginx. Also notice the content length header of 3,741. Remember, that's the number of bytes that's contained in the response body or payload itself. Speaking of that payload, in Chrome, where you will see that is in the response. And because this response contained HTML, you'll see the payload itself is what contained that HTML. Now spend some time exploring the details of requests and responses and how they look on different websites. Again, remember that when you navigate to a less plain site, let's say stackoverflow.com, you'll see a whole host of requests if you haven't filtered them. Your list will be much longer than one. You could simply scroll up to the top to get the original document that was requested, or again, you could use this filtering option to choose doc and see only that initial document that was requested, and then check out the details of the response headers, the request headers, and anything else you like.